Hello and welcome to this week's edition of My Granny is Irish. This week we are joined by Michael Murphy, journalist at the Telegraph. So our second Telegraph writer to join us. We had Tim Stanley a few weeks ago. Now, Michael, I read a book recently and there was quite a funny line in it, supposedly that when former Prime Minister Boris Johnson was meeting our then Taoiseach Leo Varadkar, he said to one of his aides, "Oh, why can't he just be called Murphy like the rest of them?" So I'm assuming with the surname Murphy, you either have Irish parents or grandparents or a granny or grandfather who's Irish somewhere.
Yes, I'm rumbled. I have two very, very Irish parents who
Okay.
have resisted all attempts to assimilate them into English culture. They're very much, their soul and social life is very much still in Ireland. So I spent a lot of time there growing up.
Okay. Well, I could nearly talk about this for the but they didn't give you an Irish first name though. That you're not Mihal Murphy. We have Mihal Martin as our Taoiseach, but they stayed with Michael.
Well, a lot of my friends, my dad's friends, call me Mihal, and I see that as a term of endearment. So
Okay. And whereabouts were they? I mean, you don't have to say obviously it's public, but in general, if you have spent time in Ireland, where do you normally go to? Is it on the east or the west?
Well, I spent a fair bit of time in Connemara,
Oh,
Kerry, Carrick-on-Shannon,
okay.
Dublin mainly.
Right.
And yeah, I've got some relatives dotted around a few other places as well. So I occasionally
They're
venture
the
out.
rainy places. You've just mentioned the rainy places.
Yeah, well, that doesn't narrow it down.
Well, the East Coast is slightly less rainy. It is slightly less
Okay.
rainy. Then yeah, West. Yeah, I mean, you're just a dot in the Atlantic. So, that's my view. That's my view. But anyway, we will. You certainly in the Telegraph you've written about Ireland in a lot of detail. So you seem to me at least very familiar with both countries. And of course, as ever, it seems the big issue dominating last week and the beginning of this week in both countries was immigration. And in fact, a rare occasion where British policy has had a direct impact, it seems, on the political scene in Ireland. So maybe you can start us on I think Sabine Mahmood's proposals for immigration reform in the UK. And just a general feel again as to just the amount of immigration that the UK has sustained over the last decade at least.
Yeah. So Shabana Mahmood announced last week that she was going to get tough on asylum seekers in particular, and it seemed like she was moving towards, at least superficially, towards something like the Danish model, where they're going to increase the push factors, which are things like threatening to confiscate goods of migrants arriving in Britain. I mean, I don't know if they are, the white Russian emigres of the 20th century, we're going to be arriving with diamonds stored in their walking sticks. But that was definitely a headline grabber, and a few other policies that she was suggesting seemed to at least annoy all of the right people as far as the right wing press was concerned. And so she's we can get into how serious I think her proposals are. But she at least appeared to be taking a more muscular stance than her predecessor.
Yeah, well, I think one of the issues was that she was going to increase the time you would have to be in the UK from something like 5 years to 20 years, which is, obviously a considerable change. And another issue is the tightening up rules around family reunification. Now, my view, and I've written on this in Substack, is that nothing of import will get through. Not wanting to be negative, but in sum, my view is that the UK and Ireland, to some extent, is what I would call institutionally open border. that's what that's what the legal system is. That's what the political system is, and you can't sort of try and force through a bill like that when all the other institutions you need on board to make those reforms happen are, philosophically against you. Um, but we can discuss whether maybe that's too pessimistic a view. But you wrote a piece then in the Telegraph in relation to, I think, the riots at City West Hotel um, a few um, a few weeks ago, and the immigration reforms in the UK. Then it spilt over to Ireland, where well, they were briefed supposedly by the Home Office, and again, our minister here, Jim O'Callaghan, is now proposing to tighten up the rules here. So one of the stories today in the Irish Times is asylum seekers to pay up to 40% of income to fund accommodation under new plans. Now, again, whether or not this will get through, it's difficult to know. But in that piece that you said in relation to the City West riots, you had an interesting idea about how if this was a private company, I think I can't, and they had sort of imported, say this was an African asylum seeker that had allegedly raped a 10-year-old Irish girl, that in fact this would be seen as negligent. And I think that's actually a very interesting idea. What's your view, or do you want to expand on the idea that just bringing in all of these what I call military age men from misogynistic countries really is a form of negligence?
Yes, well, if you were operating a school or a state-run facility for vulnerable people like the elderly, and you allowed, you know, criminals without checking their background onto those premises, you would be liable for criminal negligence. It's the same, the externalities, the negative externalities of a company pouring toxic waste into a river
Yes.
are, to my mind, analogous to bringing in people from the most dysfunctional regions on earth without any background checks, and they then rather predictably repeat the negative behaviors that have made those countries unlivable in our own country. I mean, this is all if it was completely unexpected. And there was very little the state could have done to have prevented this. That would be one thing, but this is, this has been going on for the last 20 or 30 years in this country, and it's only, getting worse. And so I think that we need to adopt at least a mentality, and the I think a big problem with our current immigration system is that the people who draft these laws and then oversee it have a very loose accountability loop for the
Yeah.
consequences of those policies.
Mm.
For example, a colleague of mine spoke to a whistleblower in the who deals with asylum claims, and he said that it takes about a day's worth of paperwork to reject a claim, whereas you can accept a claim straight away.
Yeah.
And so, people have come out and told some of my colleagues, again, who have written about this, that they're worried that some of the people they've accepted, because they didn't have legitimate grounds to reject them, are going to go on and be in the headlines for murder or some sort of heinous crime. So I think that a healthy system would have a far tighter feedback loop of accountability for the people who are making these decisions, and potentially even consider criminal liability if it's proven that you have been criminally negligent with how you've overseen that duty. I think that a culture of impunity has led to a lot of these disastrous happenings, like what happened in City West.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a few things. I mean, I've been thinking about this, and you've been thinking writing about it for a while as well. I mean, if I think it would probably be helpful now. I know others on the right who like to do purity tests, just talk about immigration in general. But I think if we want to get serious on the right, we should probably be splitting out immigration from asylum. So my issue really is with the asylum and refugee system for a number of reasons. First of all, by definition, they're not adding anything to the state. Okay, if you're a legal immigrant, even if you're low skilled and low paid, maybe working in childcare or working in hospitality, you are filling a need for one reason or another that at the moment neither the UK or Irish economy can. Now, you others might say, well, that's because the benefits are too generous, and that's because they're okay. Fine, you go and fix that, and you cover that hole, and call me when you do that. I have other priorities. But these asylum seekers and refugees. I mean, as you say, in a way, the inconsistency and the danger is, first of all, by definition, they're not offering you anything. All the benefit is to them. They are seeking refuge in your country. And they are coming from, usually, as I say, the most dysfunctional, often war-torn countries. They may have witnessed genocide, etc. And although people might think this is sort of a bit soft on me in a way, on individual cases, they may well be sympathetic. But I actually am somebody who really believes in things like trauma and things like that. And you are importing, for instance, in the UK, which I still think is unbelievable, we know because of this email system, there were at least 25,000 Afghanis flown in by the RAF and granted refuge. Now, people may say, well, they were the people who were most Western. They were the interpreters. Well, I think about maybe 5,000 of those. Surely not 25,000 were all interpreters. So you're importing people from, as you said, one of the most dysfunctional states on planet Earth. Is it unfortunate for them? Yes. Should the UK and Ireland be taking them? No, because we just simply don't have the capacity. And ironically, in legal terms, the more dysfunctional the country you are, the perhaps greater trauma you have suffered as a person, that actually goes in your favor, right? That's even more reason to grant you refuge and asylum. But if you take that as a whole, um, and if you look at the case of City West, which is a 10-year-old girl who was allegedly attacked, that still has to go to trial. And then in England, on last Friday in Nuneaton, um, there were there was a plea case, and one of the defendants, an Ahmad Malicho, I cannot pronounce his name for good reason because he's not British or Irish and has no business being there, pleaded guilty to a single charge of rape of a child under 13. But the other charges have to go to trial. So two Afghanis of no fixed abode are going to go to trial for basically attacking a 12-year-old girl. And people, the thing is, as you say, this is negligent on behalf of the state. It is also foreseeable that 22-year-old, 23-year-old men from Afghanistan, where basically women can't even speak on the street, will have misogynistic tendencies and are a clear and present danger to women and girls. And I've just had enough of this, because all of this is couched in legal terms. So what those two refugees can say is, oh, well, we need indefinite leave to remain under Article whatever of the European Convention of Human Rights, because if you ship us back to Afghanistan, our right to life and the rest will be hindered. But what about the human rights of the two girls who were attacked? They have to wait to be attacked before they can claim it. And I know for a fact in the case law that you can. So what we need now is for any woman and girl who is attacked by a military age man who's been given refuge or waiting for refuge in either Britain or Ireland, to take a case under Article 3, which says no one shall be subjected to torture or inhumane or degrading treatment or punishment, and sue the state for it. Those cases can be brought. Um, and I know it's easy for me to say, but you have plenty of human rights lawyers, falling over themselves to represent Ahmed and Malik Al, and will tell us their story of great woe. I don't care. You have a list of priorities. Your priorities should be the 10 and 12-year-old girls in your own country. This shouldn't come as a surprise for you if they're attacked. And I don't think they should have to wait to be attacked either. So we need to put that case law together. Sorry, I had to get that out. It's actually only, but it in a way, I think this is what's annoying the public so much, is because to us it's obvious. It's obvious if you're bringing in men from countries we know that women would never, English and Irish women would never immigrate to, right? Who-
Well, I mean, the
No.
the the governments of Ireland and Britain are explicit on this point. If you look at the Department of Foreign Affairs travel guidance advice, it will say do not go to these countries. And yet the Home Office or the Justice Department in Ireland will then say, well, here are your new neighbors.
Yes.
We are bringing these countries to you. And
Yeah.
so there's a sort of mismatch between what the safety assessment is for people going abroad and what they're willing to accommodate for people coming into our countries. And I think that's it. You said a lot there, and I think there is a lot to unpack. So just on that point, I think just to extend this topic of criminal negligence, I think we should take what insurance brokers would call an actuarial approach to our immigration systems. We have actually very good data now on various, on different groups from different countries of origin and what their, overall risk is likely to be for violent crime, for being a net drag on the welfare state, for all sorts of things that we should be baking into our assessment of whether this person and it's harder. It's not really possible to. It's much harder to do that on an individual basis. But when you're talking about large groups of people, these things are
Yes.
actually have remarkable predictive value. So I think that's if we were to adopt that actuarial approach, you're right in that the low hanging fruit would be asylum claims, because these people, there's studies out in Scandinavia where asylum seekers are the biggest trouble, the cohort that caused the most trouble, essentially, most likely to be convicted of violent and sexual crime, least likely to be net contributors to the state. So I think that's that's certainly a good place to start. But I would slightly push back on the idea that legal immigration is I think that's certainly a secondary concern in terms of propensity towards violent crime and all these things that we care about. But I think it's a big problem in that the philosophy behind it is I think it rests on a shaky foundation, that if we have jobs to fill, that this is necessarily a positive for our societies. And it's if you have, say, a gig economy with Deliveroo drivers and Uber drivers, and you have large multinational companies that need what is effectively a slave labor force, people who are going to work cheaply and be, quite flexible in where they're willing to live and what hours they're willing to work, more so than, say, the native population. It's great for multinational companies that can, pay them low wages, and that then suppresses the wages of the native workforce, which then has knock-on effects where I think that we tend to view say, like, overall GDP figures as something that if our GDP is rising, a high tide is going to lift all boats. But we know that's not the case. We should be thinking about this more in terms of a zero-sum game where there are winners and losers. And some of the big losers recently have been the people who are who have missed out on companies investing in upskilling the native workforce. There's data on this in America and some in Britain as well. Is that the benefits are often zero sum, like I say. So it's, there are winners and losers. There were clear winners and losers from America offshoring their productions. China, you deracinated the Rust Belt in America, and you had a lot of second order effects, in part the fentanyl crisis and this, deaths of despair from, unemployment and people just being out of work. And I think we should look at our societies in a much more holistic way than just GDP. GDP doesn't actually tell you very much. It can be misleading. We should be looking at GDP per capita is arguably a better metric, and also looking at our populations like they are, in a sense, like they're an asset. And if you have, like we do in Britain, 5 million people out of work, not looking for work, and we just say, well, okay, we're going to import a workforce to paper over that crack, then you've got, massive depreciating assets, people who are losing motivation, who are not in work and are going to affect it. We know that from the data that if people are out of work for longer than nine months to a year, it's increasingly unlikely. The odds that they will go back into work basically fall off a cliff.
Yes.
And so that should be the primary focus, and immigration allows us to ignore that problem. Another problem that it allows us to ignore is, it's often said that because we have declining birth rates in Western countries, that we need immigration to supplement the workforce. Now, this is a sort of liberal solution par excellence. What are we essentially saying? We're going to outsource reproduction to the wombs of the developing world because we aren't reproducing. Now, that the obvious answer to that question would be, well, why aren't we reproducing ourselves? And are there sort of pro-natalist policies that we can take to remedy that? I mean, I see that as one of two or three major existential threats to our countries, our ways of life. Yet the Irish government has explicitly said that it's not interested in pro-natalist policies, and there's no indication that the British government are either. And so it's a useful way for them to push aside these major issues that we have with our domestic workforce and domestic population, and sort of kick the can down the road with addressing those. I also think as well that it essentially rests on the fallacy that migrants do not get hold and then need to rely on public services themselves, right? So that you import migrant workforce, they then get citizenship or leave to remain, they get all the same rights in a welfare state as everybody else. They're going to in turn be a massive burden on housing, schooling, health services in particular. And then what will happen? You'll need more to replace them. And this resembles a pyramid scheme.
Yeah.
Or,
a Ponzi scheme, I think.
Yeah, a Ponzi scheme.
Well, let's just... Okay, I mean, I'd probably broadly agree with you on much of that. Although there is always one thing when it comes to the cheap labor. I do hear this argument a fair bit from the right. I mean, first of all, the minimum wage does stop a complete race to the bottom. When it comes to wages, technically, if you had a cohesive, homogeneous society, you would argue against the minimum wage because it forces certain cohorts out of work. But the minimum wage in the UK stops a total collapse when it comes to salaries. But so it's not just really, well, I think, if we're really honest with ourselves, Michael, it's not just the multinational corporations who we all love to hate, it seems now, both on the left and at least the conservative right, who benefit from cheap, low-skilled immigration. It's also just, well, you and me and a lot of natives, if that's the word we're using, because we get the cheap goods delivered by Amazon, and we get our cheap deliveries delivered by whoever the delivery boy is, right? And I mean, I think if we, even if you look at a lot of the Tory boys that spend a lot of their time weeping over immigration, I reckon they rely on quite a bit of cheap labor. And if they had to pay more, I think a lot of them would say no. The NHS, and I don't think it's just a lie from the left, I think would crumble pretty fast without immigration, although that's obviously I would think at least middle school. I don't think people are willing to pay more for childcare. The childcare industry relies on a lot of foreign women. The elder care industry now relies on a lot of foreign women. And it always reminds me of these vox pops you see on the BBC. Say the W.H. Smith over there is sort of like the local news agent, obviously, and they still exist, I think, in airports and train stations. But they used to be like the go-to place on the high street. And most of their high street stores, I assume, have closed now. And W.H. Smith's store closes, and then BBC dispatch a reporter over to, Finchley High Street, saying it's like they ask a local, what do you think of the W.H. Smith closing? And they go, oh, I'm devastated. I'm really devastated in their British accent. And then the question is, when was the last time you shopped at the W.H. Smith store that you're standing behind that's now shuttered? Oh, I never shop there. No, I get all my stuff on Amazon.
Yeah. No, I think that's there's some truth in that. And if we're being honest, if people want to take a maximalist approach to cutting immigration, they should be honest that we are going to lose some degree of convenience and affordability. That's certainly true. But you mentioned earlier about if we want to debate this seriously, we have to get into the weeds, the granular detail. And actually, in Britain last year, only 21% of people who applied for a visa actually went on to work. And if you look at certain populations, let's just say like the Somali population, I think it's 9% of Somali women in this country are in work. I think it's only about 34% of the Somali population here that are in work. So only a small proportion of the millions of people that have come into this country are doing those key jobs like in the NHS, etc., that we care about.
Yeah.
There are also other problems with this as well, like in Ireland, for example. Foreign workers were far more likely to be disciplined by the medical council. We've had videos of foreign workers abusing people in Irish care homes. There are not only quantitative but qualitative questions we need to ask about what sort of society we're building. Part of the issue with the grooming gangs is that, in the same way as if you have the situation that is most likely to result in a child being abused is being in the care of a step parent. And when you've got somebody who's not the biological father on the scene. And I think there's a similar dynamic at play with immigration writ large. If you have immigrants, large numbers of immigrants from the developing world in positions, from different cultures, often cultures that don't place as high a premium on being a high trust
Yes.
society, with things like honesty, then you do open yourself up to new and often elevated risks. So I think it's a complicated. It's not as simple as these people are filling these roles and our society would collapse without them. I've been around Eastern Europe. I've been to Poland a fair bit this year. I've been to Hungary, and their health services aren't collapsing. They're perfectly able to operate their societies and give people decent standard of living. So I think we should be careful about talking ourselves down too much.
Yes.
And a large reason that Britain's health service is under the strain it's under is effectively subsidizing the ill health of foreigners. And so there are I personally think that we could slash about 85% of the current rate of immigration, if not more, and our systems would potentially even benefit for it. Yes, some things might get more expensive. You might have less kebab houses, or Deliveroo might take a bit longer. Personally, that's a price I'm willing to pay.
Sure.
And then that's before we even get onto, this is just the tip of the iceberg. This is before we get on to all the subterranean issues about, when you have when you change the admixture of a society radically in the way that we have in both of our countries in recent years, um, you you know what I call the sort of realm of the implicit, the things that don't need to be made explicit, a joke or a certain way of, a cultural reference or an illusion, all of the things that go up, the million and one things that make a culture and make interaction feel meaningful and familiar to people. That starts to shrink, and that's it's slightly intangible, but you can't necessarily measure it in the way that you can these economic questions, but it's often what that people value the most in their day-to-day lives. And so
Yes.
it's incredibly important to I suppose just remain cognizant of those things as well.
Yeah, look, I think it comes down to that deeply held sort of conservative value that things are very difficult to build up, and the society and culture that have been built up in England that you would traditionally think of as English or even British, and also in Ireland, these things are easy to wreck though, right? Over 10 or 20 years. Now I'm going to yeah, and I mean the thing is, I think Douglas Murray touched on this in his book, The Strange Death of Europe, and I, for some reason, it just, well, I wrote a piece going, yeah, I'm going to become an Igbo princess. So I'm going to go over to Nigeria and you see that instant laugh, that instant smile by you is the ridiculousness of that idea, right? But in Europe, we're expected to take on loads of different cultures, right? Misogynistic cultures, cultures of honor and shame. Um, Somewhere from Pakistan, someone from Afghanistan, someone from Somalia, someone from wherever, and you can't even commit a face crime. If you twitch, you're in trouble. But if I headed over to Nigeria and pulled up a seat around, to the Igbo and said, like, can I want to be an Igbo princess? Like, I think they'd have some serious questions for me to answer. But that's essentially, what that's the equivalent of the reverse, but it is ludicrous to think about. And again, I mean, I put in the piece as well, you know, I mean, people give out about the ads and stuff, and like it's not something that really bothers me, but I think it's the incessant nature of it. So, like, if all of my children have blonde hair and blue eyes, now if I went over to Nigeria and they presented parents' clan brown hair, blue eyes as Nigerians, and don't you dare question it, people would say you're taking the piss.
I
Like,
think what bothers people, what certainly bothers me, is the sense that you are being constantly propagandized.
yeah,
It's infantilizing, it's insulting, because the subtext is that you need to be morally corrected somehow. Your racial biases are need to be hammered out of you by presenting, period dramas in which English kings and queens were black. And that's somehow going to be an improving force in your life. I think people are rightly irked by that. I mean, apart from anything else, just on aesthetic grounds alone, it's an effect. It's an affront against rendering an accurate portrayal of society and history. Um, and so, yeah, I think that's a big that's this is often one of the things that are written into the small print of mass immigration. They say, like, right,
yes,
okay, we're gonna people are gonna come here, and when it's just getting off the ground, it's always these arguments about, well, we need to help these poor people, and then once they establish themselves in enough numbers, the tone of voice changes markedly, and you get more. It becomes a lot more forthright in what people demand of the society and the things that you have to give up that you didn't envisage. Um,
yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think just maybe finally on the immigration issue, and I don't necessarily like to speculate as to motives. Sorry, I'm just going to put on a cardigan. But, you know, I mean, intent is important. And how much of this do you think was really intentional? how much of it is just pure negligence, because Denmark have made a decision, and they have gotten a lot tougher. And I think last year the amount of refugee status they granted was something like 690 people, like 690, which, as I said elsewhere, is a rounding error, even when it comes to Irish numbers. I mean, 690, that's only the people at the front of the boat on a single day coming over from Calais for the UK. I just don't think that this is, I'm not necessarily think they have a grand design. But I think I've written before that, they really do believe that diversity is our strengths. And they believe it like as a value. And that their vision of society, the uber diverse society, which is kind of, it seems to have changed. Is it multicultural? Is it not? They view as it's just better than, English society. It's better than Irish society. And they're going to work towards making that happen.
Yeah. Well, I think I'd agree with that. I think that, especially after the Second World War, we learnt a very narrow set of lessons, which was something like ethnic and cultural homogeneity leads to chauvinism and racism and all the rest of it. And therefore, the opposite must be better. You've got a number of utterances from key people in the late 90s and early noughties who said this explicitly. One being a Labour advisor to Tony Blair, who said,
Yes.
we're going to rub the right's nose in it.
Yeah.
There was a cabinet secretary under Tony Blair, a guy called Gus O'Connell,
He,
who's the second
yeah.
most
I
powerful
think it was
person.
Gus O'Donnell, and he also
Gus
had
O'Donnell,
Irish.
sorry.
He also had Irish. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, God is what they called him, right?
Yeah.
God. Yeah.
And he said explicitly that he viewed his job as not working to the advantage of the English people or British people, but
Yeah.
the global community. And so I think this was the zeitgeist post-war, especially under the American umbrella, and you can see that it's taken hold far more strongly in the countries that have been under the American orbit for the longest. It's one of the ironies of post-war history is that the countries like Hungary and Poland, who were behind the Iron Curtain and we all felt very sorry for, were actually shielded from and then somewhat inoculated against that that tendency, and I think that's actually served them quite well.
Yes. And actually,
Whether it's
maybe it just
whether it's
another
been
question in terms of motivation. Why? How much of it then is have been, again, this is exclusive to Britain. How much of this is making up or caused by post-colonial guilt?
I think it's basically been trotted out, opportunistically as and when that it seemed like a good argument. I think it's these things are often interchangeable. We'll say we'll initially, especially with the Commonwealth migrants, we had a sense of colonial obligation towards them. I mean, God knows, what we owe Albania or some of these other countries. So it's I think that's a part of it. People often glibly say that, well, Britain colonized the world, therefore we should abolish our borders, which never made much sense to me. I think a large part of it is just that we have such a sclerotic system now that it's like moving an oil tanker. It's very difficult to actually see where the levers of power are. I also think that we part of that post-war consensus, there were some assumptions that we made about people. We with the Declaration of human rights and the sanctity of each individual, we by trying to universalize the idea of human rights, implicit in that was the idea that we would judge people as individuals. And we come from quite individualistic societies, especially the English tradition, is highly individualistic. And we we sort of projected that onto the world. But what we, what we've who we've invited are people who live in clan structured societies, and that
Yes.
is actually the norm throughout most of the world. It's only a
Yes.
very it's only a slither of Northern Europe and Japan who have ever cultivated some who have a long-standing tradition of individualism, and it's not obvious that that is at all normal or going to catch on amongst the people we've invited.
And yeah, and I think with clan cultures as well comes honor cultures, which are very dangerous and often misogynistic. And they're not. I meant to write more about this, but they're not unique to race either, because obviously in the deep south you had an honor culture, where you had, gentlemen calling out each other all the time, willing to take to duels, and you see that actually the scene of it in Gone with the Wind, where when Rhett Butler is giving some hard truths to the Confederates, saying they're going to lose because all they have is cotton and sleighs, and where the Union soldiers are actually armed. He has to leave because he's afraid one of them is going to call him out. He's going to call him out for a duel. Now he had the best shot in the South, according to Ashley, so he wants to leave so he wouldn't end up shooting one of them. So honor cultures are not based on racial lines, but I think extremely dangerous and have really caught a foothold in Britain. And I really don't want to see it in Ireland. I mean, in relation to the post-colonial, I'll just do the post-colonial argument really annoys me because it's used against the British because you guys colonized. Well, you didn't actually because your parents are Irish. You guys colonized, therefore you should have open borders. But then if you turn on the Irish media, because we were colonized, for some reason we should also have open borders. Like, and none of it makes any sense.
Yeah.
But they're never a consistent bunch.
Yeah, I mean, it comes back to this idea that we are just fungible units, that we can be interchanged
Yes.
easily, that you can just plant entire villages from rural Pakistan into post-industrial northern England, and they are going to become as Yorkshiremen,
Yeah.
as English as anybody else. And we know that's not the case. I mean, if you read some of the testimony of the grooming gang survivors, for example, you have girls who one girl went from abuser to abuser to abuser within a period of about 4 hours.
Yes.
And every single person she bumped into was an abuser. And those people had, up to 10 or 12, often relatives or friends that they knew they could call and would be up for doing that sort of thing, would not snitch on them if they were after the fact. To have that level of confidence in
Yes.
clan structures would be unheard of in our own communities. And so, it's not just honor culture, but also nepotism and in-group preference that that's taken us centuries as a society to rein in.
Well, the
Um,
other, I mean, we probably could do a whole podcast just on the grooming gangs, but of course, the critical and most damning aspect of that was, as you say, the clan facilitated it, but it was, and I assume they were still the white police officers, the white English institutional powers that looked the other way, or indeed facilitated both in the police and the social workers. And that really, the question as to why they did that when it goes against their cultural norms, right? That was the real huge wrong, I think, committed there on a kid. And I sometimes compare it to, the Catholic abuse scandal. It isn't just a case of one priest or even a number of priests abusing children in isolation. No, it was the cover up and the institutional facilitation of that, again, directly contrary to values, that was what makes that so damning.
Yes, I mean, if you want to know what a society values, look what it's willing to heap onto the pyre and sacrifice in service of those values. And what the grooming gang inquiry, what the grooming gang report, the first report conducted by Dame Louis Casey, I believe back in 2011 or 12, and later information that surfaced is consistently shows that we at every level of state culpability, from people who are social workers, police, schools, there was just a dread of being called racist, or even having that cloud hang over you. And so we've elevated racism or anti-racism almost above all other values, like protecting young vulnerable girls. And you see this time and again with the Manchester Arena bombing in I
Yes.
think it was 2017. There was a security guard who spotted the shifty-looking suspect, and he didn't do anything because he didn't want to be called racist. Similar thing with Axel Rudakabana, the Rwandan man who decided to go and stab girls at a Taylor Swift dance class, which set off the Southport riots last year. A teacher had, I think, said he looked shifty and suspicious and was carrying a knife, and she was rebuked for racial insensitivity.
Yes. And it
And
was
so,
the same in the case, the really terrible case of Irfan Sharif, who tortured and murdered his own daughter, Sarah Sharif, and was given custody of her despite multiple previous complaints in relation to domestic violence and how he treated women. This wasn't just speculation, and a family court judge awarded him custody of that child, essentially signing her death warrant. And the neighbours in the report that just came out a week ago said that they did hear screaming, and again didn't want to raise the alarm because they didn't want to be called racist, and in particular not on social media. So this, of course, we could move on to this cowardliness that has been really imbued due to essentially terrorizing the population there, that we will call you racist if you call out any of this shocking behavior. We will make your life a misery, or even in more subtle ways, like you won't get the promotion, right? And it now takes courage to say, to call up social services. I mean, the details of that case were really shocking. And the fact, and she was well known. It wasn't one of these that she went under the radar. Well known to the authorities. Some women had raised the alarm. Then they bring her home to homeschool her, and she's dead within 6 months, because I call it male Pakistani privilege. Because basically, it seems to me from those cases that you've said, you can do whatever the hell you want.
yeah.
And you won't get called out for it. And it's just and where the feminists are, and where the coalition against violence and girls are over there and here, I don't know, but clearly diversity is more important than the safety of women and girls.
Yeah. And we I often think there's a horseshoe theory with these things, where if you run away from racism far enough, you will create fresh horrors
Yeah.
that are equal to the horrors that can come with an excess of ethnic pride or chauvinism. And a little bit of chauvinism and confidence in your own society, essentially the pride in your own society that would have effectively helped to prevent some of these atrocities
Yes.
have been lost, and they are a useful inoculant to to naivety and to the horrors of the grooming gangs and all of the things we've been discussing.
Yeah, well, we better pause it there anyway. As I say, we could probably do the whole podcast on that, but I will say, well, I haven't. I don't know. I'll have to go back on to you. For you, it is. This is being recorded on the Tuesday, and it comes out on a Wednesday. With tomorrow, I think, which is Budget Day in the UK, and Rachel Reeves, it seems, was going to. She was very. She had to find her something to fill her 20 billion black hole. I think a few months ago they tried to bring in some very modest welfare cuts that would have saved about 5 billion. That failed. And now instead she's going to spend at least 3 billion lifting the two-child benefit cap. So that's amazing that you've turned a 5 billion save into a 3 billion spend. I think if I did that in this house, maybe questions would be asked. So are you ready to hand over all your money to the Exchequer? How are you feeling over there?
Well, I think that it was to be expected, really, that she was going to hike taxes. Labour's under the cosh, really, of intransigent backbenchers who will not let them implement even very modest fiscal reforms, like budgetary reforms like the 5 billion that you mentioned, which, by the way, would the financial situation we're in now is we are just trying to raise enough to cover servicing our debts, and that 5 billion
Yes.
wouldn't even cover the servicing of our debts. And so it seems like cutting welfare, a rather bloated welfare system is not on the cards. I mean, they've announced that as part of our Motability scheme to help people who with certain disabilities, which is essentially everyone now, to buy a car. They've removed some of the luxury cars from that scheme, like Audis and BMWs. So
Oh,
that's
right.
progress of a kind, I suppose. But apart
Yeah.
from that, it's rather thin gruel in terms of actual fiscal prudence. That it seems to very much be penalizing the productive sector of our economy. They're cutting ISAs, I think, from 20,000 to 12,000, which is a scheme to help people save money without tax free. That's primarily going to penalize the people who are spendthrifty and make the right decisions.
Yeah. And do you think, Michael, I mean, obviously, a huge amount of although the turnout was quite low, I forget how many people actually voted for Starmer. It failed as a landslide election, but clearly a lot of middle class people definitely did vote for him. Do you think some of them now are having buyer's remorse? Because at the end of the day, Labour is Labour, even if the Prime Minister is more to the centre, and his high profile ministers, his backbenchers, are basically a classic Labour. They will tax and spend. They will tax the middle class to spend, some on non-working class and some, in fairness, to aid low pay, which we've talked about before, right? How many. A lot of the benefits go to those in work. Maybe their salaries would be higher, or they could upskill, right, if we didn't have the level of low-skilled immigration. So that actually goes to your point earlier in relation to, people say, well, we need the cheap labor, but no, maybe not. Again, if these people, as I said, who are in work but also in receipt of benefits, were able to upskill and fill other jobs. Do you think there's buyer's remorse now? Because the middle class are going to get hammered tomorrow, one way or the other, whether it's a stealth tax or the bigger headline proposals have been binned. But I mean, you have to find the money from somewhere.
Yeah, I think that to the extent that there is buyer's remorse, it predates the budget. They've flipped. They basically, their strategy has been to announce big, controversial, sometimes painful policy decisions, get all of the flack for having done so, and then scrap it at the last minute. And so it's just absolutely the worst of both worlds. And they've done this 3 or 4 times now on big things like winter fuel and a few other things. And so they are not exuding an image of competence, and I think they've done something to annoy everybody now. It's you're seeing this in the splits in their parliamentary party. For example, you've got this new Your Party, which was
Yes.
the product of formerly of Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana, quite a far left wing Labour MP in Parliament. And be interesting to see if that really has legs, because that could a lot of the annoyance with Labour from their base is actually over things like Gaza, and their dealings with Israel, and the the immigration stuff. I'm sure is going to tick people off, even though I don't actually think they've done very much. And so, I haven't actually seen polling data on the middle class, Labour voters' reaction to this budget, but I suspect that it's just another nail in the coffin for their credibility on economic matters.
Yeah. Now,
Also, it's important to stress as well that they have reneged on a lot of their initial promises, and then have been unwilling to offer even a mea culpa about that as well.
oh, no, well, yeah, never, don't explain, or never complain, or whatever it is. I mean, one of the big divides, even on the right, I think, between the UK and Ireland was obviously over Israel. And you wrote in the Telegraph, Ireland's obsession with boycotting Israel has reached farcical new heights. Dublin's posturing over Gaza is unserious virtue signaling. Now, you're not that some people will take exception to that. I call it Hibernian exceptionalism. A lot of people like to take the high moral ground, and it is definitely very, very, very pro Gaza over here. Certainly the talking classes. What do you think of is it important to take a moral stand, even if it has very little effect, or do you think this was just, as you said, empty virtue signaling?
Um, well, when it comes to international relations, I'm a realist. I think that states should act ruthlessly in their own interests, and that doesn't mean that there's no scope for moral actions. I sympathize with the people who are genuinely disturbed by the scenes in Gaza. I think there's plenty of legitimate criticism that could be leveled against the Israeli government. Um, I I do think that there is like a shrieking, hysterical activist class on the pro-Palestinian side, which gets a lot of airtime in both of our countries, and which
Yes.
is very effective at lobbying the Irish Irish TDs and the Irish government. And I think that what I was concerned about with the attitude that the Irish government was adopting is because it seemed like they were willing to incur disproportionate economic harm to Ireland for the effect of what they were actually trying to achieve, which was
Yeah.
to move both parties closer to a ceasefire, which if we're being honest, Ireland has absolutely no power to influence whatsoever. And so, particularly with the Occupied Territories Bill, I saw that.
Which they still want to pass, by the way, and I've written against, as you say, it's just. I mean, we are very, very exposed, obviously, to American corporations. I mean, in another piece of yours, you said, is Ireland a country for Irish families envisaged by founders, or a post-national corporate entity built on fashionable American dogma around race and sex? Now, we could go into the second bit, but it clearly is at the moment a post-national corporate entity, which is why we don't have a 20 billion black hole. But if you're going to go with that, right, I think you need to be consistent. And one of the TDs, the Social Democrat TD, got up here and said we should pass the Occupied Territories Bill because people wave flags at cars. I mean,
Well,
but a
you
lot of
know,
people's jobs, depend on American corporations, both primarily and secondarily over here. But it seems that I don't think the government really want to pass the Occupied Territories Bill. I sense they want the Attorney General to dig them out of it with some legal advice. But it's obviously, I've actually immoral, I think, to sacrifice your country's economic interests for something that will make no difference to the occupied territories, right?
exactly. And if they had been upfront with the public and gone, Winston Churchill, and promised them blood, soil, and toil and sweat for their troubles, then that would be one thing. And if they achieved some kind of democratic consensus around the the immolation of the Irish economy in a sort of futile gesture to save Gaza, then that would be all well and good. But that wasn't the way it was being discussed or pitched. Micheál Martin, I think, when he realized the scale of the resistance to that policy in America, then did issue some more cautionary language around that to the Irish public, which I was glad to see. But yeah, I think it's extremely dangerous when you get into the business of viewing yourself as a kind of moral superpower. Sweden famously
Yeah,
used to refer to itself
that's a good
as
term.
that
Yeah.
in the 20th century, and it hasn't really served them very well. And this is going back to the 90s, when Ireland, I think, published their first military white paper in 1996. The then foreign editor of the Irish Times went through the document and I think was quite prescient in his warning that a country without clear foreign policy interests, strategic interests, risks slipping into a moralistic foreign policy, which can lead you into all sorts of trouble. And again, it comes back to this idea of having a tight feedback loop to reality, because you can champion every cause under the sun and get be like Mrs. Jellyby in Dickens's Bleak
Yes, that's
House.
one of my
You know,
favorite comparisons.
uh,
Yeah.
with this telescopic moralism. Oh, the poor Africans, the poor. And if that's the way Ireland wants to go, then
But
it
it's
can
also while
actually.
your own country falls apart, right? Because the character, Mrs. Jellyby, her children were literally falling downstairs while she was, worrying about the
Ex-
African.
Exactly, and
Brother.
there's layer upon layer of hypocrisy here. So there's one thing that Ireland, has its own problems, and it should probably focus on those. In Irish politics for the last 50 years, as you'd know better than I, it has been commendably local, if at sometimes seeming a bit parochial. People, often knew where the potholes were in their constituency and those bread and butter issues that really mattered to voters. And we should, I think the Irish people would like to see more of that, especially given the, the cultural whiplash that they're experiencing with the changes in their society. There's also, an element of hypocrisy. I think it's, it's great that Ireland has positioned itself as a lucrative place for American multinationals. Part of that economic model that, has filled the Irish coffers, especially, in the last decade, does involve shortchanging the tax man in countries all over the world.
Yes.
One study estimated that this has cost, hundreds of thousands of children, education and sanitation. And, I'm not a bleeding heart liberal on these sorts of things. I think Ireland was right to avail of that position. But if they want to be consistent, then, at least, look at some of your own double standards and address those. Yeah, I just think that Ireland should just be a lot more realistic in its foreign policy, and it can make statements all it likes, but do not make the prosperity of your citizens a hostage to
Yes.
whatever moral crusade is fashionable amongst the ministers at a given time.
Yeah, because of course their salaries and their pensions will remain intact. So like I always say to the posturing, well, how many nurses are you willing to sacrifice, for this particular policy? Because that's the trade-off. And this is the problem, I think, particularly on the left, is that nobody is willing to discuss what trade-offs are. But that is what being an adult is. Everything's a trade-off, whether
There are no solutions, there are only trade-offs,
there
as
are
the great
only
Thomas Sowell
trade-offs.
said.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it's 100% correct. I applied to my own meager life, all the time. Well, we'll finish up. It's nearly Advent, not Christmas, as I think we both know. I think you're right. I think I'm right in that your Irish parents passed on the Catholic faith. Is that right? Are you
In a diluted form.
in a cultural form? Well, that's the same as
Well,
everyone else.
I go for the Saint Augustine line of, Lord, make me chaste, but not yet.
Yeah, well, no, yeah, I meant, but you're baptized Catholic, yeah? Did
Yes.
I baptize you? Yeah, no, that's all I that's all I meant. But thank you, Michael, for that very thorough explanation. And and are you very upset when people refer to Christmas as winter lights and not Christmas lights? And when Tesco sell trees, I did this with a priest last week, but I don't know. I find it fascinating when Tesco sell trees, that are fir trees or fruit cake or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I'm a bit of a like reverse Scrooge with these things. I
Yeah.
get very cantankerous when people don't afford Christmas the respect that it's due.
Okay.
I'm a big fan of Christmas, so
Yes,
I
so Christmas doesn't actually start until the 25th of December, as I discussed last week, whereas it's Advent. What I guess what I find um perhaps even more annoying is then Christian culture being sort of subtly erased is that for 5 or 10 years the complaint used to be Christmas starts too early, right, and also was too commercial. Yet now the complaint seems to be that Tesco aren't selling enough Christmas trees in November. Yeah, but
yeah.
I don't think they should be selling any Christmas trees in November because it's November.
I think a lot of this, having worked in a newsroom, is when there's a slow news day, we need to cook up some
Yes,
controversy. I remember one time
I'm glad you admitted to that. Yeah.
I was sent to Waitrose to see in November if they were stocking Christmas items early, and we managed to alert the good readers of the Daily Telegraph that this was the case. So I think people like to have some novelty. We will be kind of taking an advance on the season really by having something to talk about and look forward to, and that's all. That's
Yeah.
all good fun.
Sometimes I feel now, and the thing is, a lot of this comes from Catholic commentators. It's like they now seem to want, to walk into Tesco, have Christmas lights everywhere, Christmas trees everywhere. The checkout girls better be wearing their Christmas jumper and their Christmas hat, and they better be singing Christmas songs, from here to December. It's like, no, you don't really care. No, the algorithm is trying to, and the people in the Telegraph are trying to make you care, but deep down, you don't care. Don't engage in
Yeah,
what's
no, I mean, listen, I like jolly, Christmas lights and elves
yeah.
and Santa Claus as much as the next man. So if it comes a bit early, it's not gonna
Oh,
it's
I'm
not gonna
quite
over bother
Grinchy.
me. But
Yeah,
I
no, I'm
cannot I
quite
cannot stand
suspicious of time.
winter lights and
Oh, fair enough.
these I find these things to be kind of Americanisms actually
That's
of
true.
like trying to dilute things and I a big supporter of having been a late comer to the idea that Santa Claus isn't real. I still have it's a sore spot for me.
Oh, okay. Well, we won't get into. I'll have to put some sort of warning, won't I, at the beginning of the podcast that people should not listen to this with small children in their room. But look, on that note, I think do have a happy Advent and Christmas when it happens.
Thank you.
Michael Murphy, Boris Johnson approves of your surname. And it was really great talking to you. Actually, it was really, really fantastic talking to you. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Likewise, Laura, it's been a pleasure.